This video will explain the entire story of Hollow Knight Silksong. We'll be going over the backstory of the kingdom, the events that led to its downfall, the main story, and its endings. I'll also be recapping some old events within Hollow Knight when necessary, so if you've never played the first game or don't remember much of that entry, then I have you covered. I also want to issue a massive spoiler warning for the game, especially since we'll be talking about some endgame content very early in this video, so please be sure to beat the game and come back. As always, like the video if you enjoy and subscribe if you're new. Feel free to check out my other story videos here on the channel, or donate to the Patreon linked in the description if you'd like to support me further. And so, without further ado, let's get started. Our story begins in the kingdom known as Pharloom. Pharloom in our time is run by a monarch, one who we will discuss in much greater detail later. But Pharloom as a kingdom existed before the arrival of this monarch. 4 tribes were known to have existed before their arrival. To the southeast is a place known as the Far Fields and Hunter's March. It's not clear if these places were nameless before the monarch's arrival, but that's what they are called in-game, so we'll go with these names for now. Within this region was a tribe of ants known as the Scar, led by their leader Carmelita. She was considered the song queen of the Scar and was their most talented warrior. They seem to be a rather ruthless tribe. The various members of their tribe mostly focus on hunting and gathering. Larger creatures like the Scar Guard, Scar Stalker, and Scar Scout train to be warriors and serve their queen, although only the greatest amongst them would be considered worthy enough to defend the queen herself. One specific Scar named Gur the Outcast was known as an expert hunter and was always willing to tackle larger and larger prey, with their kills being proudly displayed in their room. The Scar can be seen adorned in bones, which they use as fashion accessories or weapons, and their territory is littered with numerous traps that were designed to catch prey. With this in mind, it's assumed that the entire tribe was trained for combat from birth, but not all the tribesmen were suited for combat. Creatures like the Scarwing could hunt, but they were used as support for the larger ants, and Scarlids were trained, like real ants, to collect the scraps and spoils and bring them back to base. To the northwest lived the people of the Coral. Known as the Sands of Karak, these beings were another hardy and ruthless tribe. Their leader was Crust King Khan, who was able to command the crust of the coral to do his bidding. He resides along with some of his flock in the Coral Tower, a place that could be described as a vertical coral reef. There he was guarded by all manner of dangerous allies. But like the Scar, some other creatures within their land were not nearly as tough, but would still pose a challenge. The Kai were a species of fish, likely hunted for their meat, but the spine-beaked Kai would use their sharp noses to pierce anyone who came near them. While the crust crawlers were able to disguise themselves within the coral crust to make it seem like they were one with the environment. Creatures like the conchfly and the driznet also used their sharp points to attack any enemies who dare approach their territory. It was a deadly and unforgiving land, but the people of Karak were strong. Their king expected much out of them, but they were eternally loyal and will put their lives on the line for him. The third group was the creatures of Shellwood. Shellwood is overgrown with plant life and bugs, many of whom seem to exist independently of one another, rather than the shared bonds of the previous tribes. A being known as Nylith is considered to be the heart of Shellwood, the one who is connected to the land's living things. She in some ways could be seen as Shellwood's mother nature. Her presence back then assured safe passage for any bugs who walked across her branches. Like many forests and swamps here in the real world, Shellwood is an ecosystem run by and for the creatures it inhabits. Predators hunt prey, while those same predators could be prey to others. Hornet notes in her journal that the destruction of the wood wasp nest could be dangerous for Shellwood's order, as removing a creature from the ecosystem could tip the balance. So it's clear that each creature lived for itself and shared the land with the other creatures who also sought to protect themselves. The final tribe was that of Verdania to the east. They were another solitary group who rarely if ever ventured from their lands, opting to stay within their territory. Although they did have creatures like the Vendanier and the Kindanier who did defend their land from harm should there ever be any. The land itself was also ruled by 2 princes, although we only know the identity of one, who was named the Green Prince. The 2 princes were lovers and equally beloved by their people for the grace they bestowed upon them when they ruled. The bugs of Verdania were especially enthralled by the ways of their ballet of death, using both violence and dance to attack any outsider who posed a threat to their land. For a time, this was the land of Pharloom. Very few records exist back then, so we aren't exactly sure of the relationship between these tribes or even amongst themselves, but we do know that they existed. Eventually, though, a higher being known as Grand Mother Silk would come into the picture. A higher being in the world of Hollow Knight is a being who has otherworldly powers. The Pale King of the Hollow Nest was able to bestow his people with sapience, enabling them to think and act with purpose and reason, but only within the confines of his kingdom. Grand Mother Silk may have done something similar, for she may have helped elevate a species known as the Farlids and turn them into the Weavers. In the end cutscene for a boss known as the First Sinner, we could see a small spider slowly transform into a weaver thanks to the thread of silk, implying that Grandmother Silk had been behind this. Sometime later, Grandmother Silk seems to have made her way to Pharloom, however the reason is unclear. Hornet claims that pale beings such as her either accept devotion or destruction, further saying that dominance is something baked into her blood. Now, pale beings are different than higher beings. The Pale King and the White Lady from the Hollow Nest are both pale beings and higher beings, but beings like Un or the Nightmare Heart from the Grim Troop are considered higher beings, just not pale ones. So according to Hornet, the pale beings seem to have an innate desire to want worship or power, whether that be establishing their own or replacing the leader of one that already exists. The Pale King from the Hollow Nest was once a worm who renounced his old form to be like his subjects. He would then later serve as ruler, where most of Hollow Nest would revere him as their leader. Grandmother Silk seems to operate the same way, where her goal seems to be the ruler of Pharloom, but she does not seem to be one of diplomacy. Grandmother Silk seems to prefer absolute fealty without any objections, as her arrival spelled doom for those aforementioned tribes. We aren't sure of the specifics behind what happened, but Grandmother Silk and her weavers may have defeated these once powerful tribes. The Coral Tower is completely gone, while many of the warriors of Karak have become terracotta-like soldiers who crusted over and died along with their king. Only one soldier is left still watching over the edge of their land, having stood guard for so long that he's been stiffened by time. Carmelita and the Scar are still alive, but her tribe is a shadow of its former self, with Carmelita herself being way past her prime. Nyla seems to have died, although the bugs of Shellwood continue to exist in their land, so it seems like the land was untouched for the most part. But due to her absence, traveling across the Shellwood can prove rather dangerous, without Nyla stepping in to assure safe passage. Verdania, however, was spared the destruction, but it came at a cost. The other prince, lover to the Green Prince, had to give up his life, as his shell and soul would serve as mold for the cogwork dancers. Other religions seem to have been stamped out as well. The chapel maid near the ruined chapel says that this is the price for choosing a different path, implying that the chapel was shut down or destroyed. Despite that, there are various smaller sects across Pharloom, such as these smaller chapels strewn about the region, and then there's the people of Wisp Thicket, who worship the Father of the Flame. This attempt at removing these places of worship was likely to funnel everyone towards their own. Evidence throughout the game suggests the Weavers were worshipped by the people of Pharloom. Weaver shrines can be found throughout the land, and most important are the presence of effigies, which are small objects used in times of prayer. These bugs are praying to specific weavers, like Atla, Weaver of Time, for prosperity and grace, reinforcing that the bugs of Pharloom had worshipped these beings at one point, although they may not have done so willingly. Ghost silk on the surface implies that these bugs were lured here by the Weavers, so they seem to have manipulated people to come to the kingdom and worship them. As for the religion itself, it seems to be one built on song. Much of the game references music, such as these notes, which use the terms measure and beat when talking about quantity. A sect within the Citadel are called conductors, Weaver notes are written on rune harps, and Hornet can also use an item called the Needlein, which can slightly possess bugs using silk. So this could explain how the Weavers managed to convince the people to come to Pharloom. When they got here though, they were greeted by a wonderfully ornate and gorgeous citadel. The citadel was a rather luxurious piece, meant to serve as the kingdom's holy place. Members of the citadel were adorned in white and gold garbs, thus signifying their holiness. Some were even given further roles within the citadel. Some become envoys who were leaders of the choir groups, while some would become bell-bearers, ringing the bells of the citadel throughout the halls. Some of them would even become soldiers, guarding the public from any threats or quelling any that happened to be inside the citadel. Regardless of their role in life, all those free of sin were welcomed in the citadel and were cared for eternally. The citadel houses many rooms, including a big spa and a massive dining table. There is also a stage where performances take place, currently run by the Great Trobio. The high halls were home of the conductors, who once conducted the choirs of the citadel. Their halls are filled with elegant music, even more gold, and a flowing waterway that passes through their domain. On the other side of this building is the Memoriam Wing. The Memoriam was designed to document and remember life outside the Citadel. Here you can find various bugs from Moss Grotto, Shellwood, and the Corals of Karak. There does, however, seem to be more than just documentation going on here, though. There are larger versions of these bugs and various taxidermied bugs, including pilgrims, that were being used for study. Just below the Memoriam is the Whispering Vaults. Here the Vault Keepers keep records of all kinds of history. Much of what we gaze upon are psalm cylinders played via gramophone, but the environment does indicate that scrolls and reading material seem to exist as well. Many younger Vault Keepers, known as Vaultborn, will eventually, after enough training, become scroll readers, who read and retell many different scrolls of prayer, while the Vault Keepers specifically handle prayers outside the vaults. Smaller bugs known as lamp bearers also help these acolytes by scurrying through the numerous dark and dusty halls of the vault to find the necessary scrolls by using their large lights to help them navigate. This was the Citadel, and for a long time would represent the power of the Grandmother and her weavers. But something happened that would change everything. The weavers seem to have gotten incredibly greedy, and also learned the truth of their existence. The weavers must have learned that they weren't the Grandmother's children, but merely bugs she helped elevate. Dialogue after the first Sinner's fight says, "She called us her children, she called us divine. She lied." Grandmother Silk seems to have not told them the full truth of the matter, and this set them off. But what was the first Sinner afraid of? Well, a rune harp in the game talks about eternal servitude, so Grandmother Silk may have had plans to put them under her spell. This connects well to their upbringing, as the first Sinner could have realized that they were creations made by Grandmother Silk, creations meant to do what their master tells them. I mean, it's fair to assume she uplifted them with a purpose in mind, and that may have scared them. To assist them in this rebellion that they had planned, they seem to have created a being with the intent of either rivaling Grandmother Silk or replacing her. Ava is a being you can find in a weave nest. These weave nests seem to have been hideouts made by the weavers in order to scheme and plan. Many of them are in the lower parts of the kingdom, far away from the Citadel, and many of them also contain lore and notes of importance. One contained an item known as the Snare Setter, which will be used in the true ending to ensnare the Grandmother. Lore next to it also corroborates this by saying, "To bind her tight, to keep us free." Back to Ava, she claims to be a child of the weavers, but not their kin. Also stating that she is imprisoned here, but it's not through malice. A rune harp near her also says to hide her, the despised child. She is a wish cast vain, divinity mimicked in form too frail. So Ava may have been created with the intent of either defeating Grandmother Silk or becoming someone like her, someone with a sense of divinity and extraordinary power. She may have also been created as a way to sidestep their curse. Ava mentions how weavers can't have children, at least not without it being incredibly painful, so Ava may have been one of their experiments to solve this. But ultimately that plan had failed, so they hid her away. Their next plan seems to have been to put her to sleep. According to the mask maker, the Citadel was made by the weavers to be a church and a cage. When we first see her in-game, the Grandmother is inside a silk ball. It seems as though the weavers had put her to sleep using the music of the Citadel. The needle in-game allows you, through small threads, to possess bugs for a brief moment, allowing you to read their thoughts. As I mentioned earlier, they may have used this power to bring people in from outside the kingdom. But for what purpose? Not just to keep their own kingdom flowing, but now, likely to keep the Grandmother asleep. An NPC in the game is Conductor Ballador. They handle all the music and choir within the Citadel. He mentions how the Mantle of Rule was claimed greedily by Pharloom's first children, the Weavers. The Grandmother's journal entry also says lulled to sleep and desperate to wake. Based on these lines, it seems as though the Citadel, while built to be a holy place for the newly established religion, would also be a cage to trap the Grandmother, allowing the Weavers to rule unopposed. The mask maker also notes that this was an act of defiance by the mortal bugs, goaded by the Weavers, meaning the Weavers did not act alone. They likely worked with the conductors to put this plan into action. Then, with everything in place, it seems like they fled the kingdom. A rune in Weave Nest Syndril shows a map of paths outside Pharloom, showing us where these weavers would flee to. We remember from Hollow Knight that some weavers had arrived from a distant land and settled here in the Hollow Nest, and now we know what that distant land was. In their absence, the conductors seem to have taken over and kept the system going. It's unclear how long this went on, and to be quite honest, I'm also not even sure about the timeline for this next part. See, the kingdom was still operating, but there was many things going on inside and outside of the Citadel to help keep it running. But whether this occurred after the weavers fled or before is not clear. Regardless, what became of this kingdom during this long period of silence? The Citadel, as grand and beautiful as it is, cannot run on its own. It needs a constant workforce to keep it running, but many of these places and bugs within them are forced to work in terrible conditions. Under the coral chambers of the Citadel is the Underworks. These bugs believe in the Citadel and its holy power and work to be noticed. Some clean the walls, polish the floors, and make sure the Citadel is in working order, even cleaning places that are incredibly dangerous like near the lava pits. While others can be seen checking equipment and supplies and shipping them up to the Citadel, or operating machinery that powers things within the Citadel. And as you can see from their muted color palette and dreary eyes, they are underserved and overworked. The conditions of the Underworks are terrible, thanks to the smog from the deadly machinery. Because of the lax nature and lack of attention from the Citadel, it's led to a troubling work environment, where the toughest among them are using their size and intimidation to rise above the rest. Further, you'd be hard-pressed to find any kind of a break or a single brief period of rest while down here. Near the top of their domain is a bench, but you have to pay rosaries to use it. Worse, once you get up, it goes back under the floorboards, requiring you to pay for it again. Most bugs in Silksong drop rosaries. Those of the Citadel make for some excellent rosary farms as they drop a healthy amount quite consistently. Those of the Underworks barely have any. In fact, most of the pilgrims you find in Bone Bottom often drop more rosaries than those of the Underworks. Right next door is also a confession booth where you can confess your sins, although as we discover, it's automated to tell you to go back to work, as that's its instruction to Hornet, despite her not confessing. But see, this confession booth is rather important because that's what all of this is about. For many of the Underwork, they see this as a step in their journey, that soon all these long hours will be worth it. A being by the name of Loam is forced to spin these cogs of these machines forever so that the machinery can keep working. He says that it's tough work, but sooner or later his devotion will catch the eye of the Citadel, and then they'll have to let him through. In fact, thinking about his life in the Citadel is what motivates him to go even faster. He and those of the Underwork work day in and day out to make sure the Citadel runs properly, all with the hope that one day the people of the Citadel will see their devotion. Beneath the Citadel lay the domains of Greymoor and Deep Docks. Notes can be found in both areas, denoting how much material they are meant to ship out at given intervals. So each worker within their domain works to provide for the Citadel. The item description for the map of Greymoor says that it's a wide, dim hollow choked by rags and dust. That's because dregs of silk would fall from the Citadel and end up in Greymoor. The dreg catchers would catch them when they fell, the thread rakers stake them atop their rakes to prepare for spooling, while the silk snippers would cut and spool these dregs of silk so that they could be returned to the Citadel. But the workers not only have to deal with the tedious, unending labor that comes from this position, but mites and craws often walk these lands and will harm anyone that comes near them. On top of the fact that they are under constant surveillance from the Moorwing, a winged beast purely bred to catch workers who fled from their tasks. Those of the Deep Docks work to collect smoke rock and sweet melt. These seem to be packaged into large black shells, the same ones found in the Underworks and the Citadel, showing a clear, direct line of transport for these materials. Most of the workers have to wear protective gear when mining for these materials, but the Deep Docks are incredibly hot given the land's naturally flowing lava, so it's very hot and extremely deadly. Like those of Greymoor, each worker has their roles to play, from extracting the minerals to carrying them to carving out new paths to dig within. Within this domain is also the Forge Daughter. She's come from a long ancient line. She was sent from her forge home at the request of those from the Citadel, with the promise that if she manned the forge, her forge home would swell in holy esteem. But while she mans the forge, much of the day-to-day operations are run by the Forge brothers Cygnus and Gron, who not only work their employees to the bone, but they even discipline them when they don't perform up to Citadel standards. But the Citadel isn't so cruel as to force them to break their backs for the company. At least not that much, anyway. They recognize that mortal bugs can't do everything, so the architects of the Citadel have been hard at work crafting automatons to do some of the more dangerous work. They often handle repairs on the cogs and moving machinery, and can sometimes be spotted in the hotter regions down below, as the heat would be too much for a normal bug to bear. They even seem to have experimented with larger scale work and even defenses. We already touched upon the Green Prince and the Cogwork Soldier, but another automaton named the Second Sentinel is from a line of sentinels made to specifically defend the Citadel from any wrongdoers. Then there is also the line of large automatons. These choruses, as I assume they're called, seem to be multi-purpose and more likely for larger projects that require heavy lifting or demolition. Despite seeming like mindless robots though, they seem to display some level of intelligence. The Second Sentinel is hardwired to kill those with the Silken Curse, but questions if Hornet is infected too, suggesting the ability to make decisions. You can also use the needle in on some of them and they have actual thoughts, one of which even says that we are together. Whether this was intended is unclear, but it seems as though not every automaton is capable of this level of thinking. But more than just these places, many other locations within Pharloom were oppressed not by the Citadel's actions, but merely by its presence. Nearest to the Citadel are Sinner's Road, Bile Water, and Putrefied Ducks. Sinner's Road seems to be an old place that they used to lock sinners in. Cages of various beings, including the Green Prince, can be found within this region, but it seems to have been turned into a home for some of the Moors, such as Kroll and Benjen. The Moors were likely living in the Greymoor. The duo here says that while the Moors catch the threads of the Citadel, it didn't used to be this way. The people of the Moors used to grow a bounty of different food before the Citadel forced them to catch their falling thread. Nowadays, though, they've taken to using the old Sinner's Road as a breeding ground for muck roaches. These bugs breed very fast, so they use them as cattle, which prevents them from starving. These ranchers are also equipped with chains and blades to make sure the muck roaches don't eat them. The food is then likely taken further in, where Chef Lugoli is stationed. They were a former Citadel chef who was expelled for repeated culinary crimes, so now they return to their home, where along with their helpers, they clean and chop up the muck roaches, so they can be served to the people. As Kroll tells it, it's dangerous work, and not the most delectable meal you could have, but it's better than starving. The putrefied ducts and biowater are similarly filled with waste and other refuse stemming from the Citadel. Many of the bugs here carry this bile in their bodies, causing them to erupt after some time. The only surviving bugs in here are those of the Stilken. Their leader, Groll the Great, along with the Stilkens, continues to rage against the Citadel, which chokes their caves and sees them suffer. A talk with Chakra reveals that the water here used to be clean. In fact, a brief spot far from the Citadel hints at what it used to be. So, like Greymoor, there seems to have been a society of bugs that lived here, but their domain was radically changed due to the Citadel. Groll and his kin seem to be hostile to anyone not from their domain. A being known only as the Seeker went to broker an alliance with Groll. He did not like the Citadel either, and assumed that a partnership built from a common goal could prove beneficial, but he was killed and hung when he arrived. While these represent the people outside the Citadel, those of the Citadel have similar reasons to be worried for their safety, for those who have sinned would be punished. Just down the road, cages filled with bugs can be seen next to Citadel guards. These bugs are being shipped off to a place called the Slab. It's meant to serve as a prison cell for those who have sinned. The prisoners are bound, covered with cloth leaving them unable to see, while they have wooden shackles placed around their necks. But the guards too have a similarly cruel fate. According to one of the penitents here, the guards used to be penitents like him. Back in the old days, one of their ilk committed a sin that was so bad that even though it's been forgotten to time, their punishment continues. This bug and their people would then become the jailers for the new wave of sinners that would inevitably come through. But not just them, but their children and their children's children would all be forced into this life forever. For example, creatures like the scabfly are described as young, born and grown in service to the Slab. This is thanks to the broodmother, who is the one who births all these jailers within the Slab. To serve here in this prison in service of the Citadel is their only hope for absolution. Within the prison, though, are boards that detail the prisoners, their sin, and if absolution will be approved. All of them will only receive absolution for their sin and death, with one not even being granted that honor. So if the penitents have no chance for redemption, then I suspect that the guards have no chance either. Reinforcing that life for the guards begins and ends in the Slab, while also creating an ironic twist of fate, where the jailed and jailers are both serving life sentences. All of this makes Pharloom sound like a horrible place to live, and it certainly is. But underneath all of this, the reason that so many bugs are likely doing this in the first place is because of their faith. As mentioned earlier, the Citadel was seen as a place of faith. Many of those working on the Citadel's payroll were likely doing this with the hope that one day their struggles would be noticed. But everywhere you go, the answer is clear. Their prayers were never answered. But that didn't stop people from trying. This reverence for the Citadel would cause many bugs to become pilgrims, and would embark on pilgrimages to visit this holy place. Bugs from all over would come to see the Grand Citadel, traversing the path that's been laid out. On this path, there are not only signs that show the pilgrims that they're on the right path, but towns and rest stops for those who pass by. But the path to the Citadel is not easy, although I guess a pilgrimage isn't supposed to be. Mind and body will be tested during this time, and success not only shows devotion, but faith. An unwavering faith in the Citadel and its teachings. To start, most pilgrims will find themselves in Bone Bottom. It's the lowest part of the kingdom, and the first step on many pilgrims' journeys. Those who come in from the surface or caves can meet the like-minded pilgrims who are getting ready to prepare for the climb ahead. It's not clear how the land looked years ago, but thanks to the presumed millions of bugs over the years, their carcasses have actually created a foundation. All across Bone Bottom and the Marrow are the discarded shells of bugs. Reaching the Citadel requires you to climb up to its ornate door. Due to this and how high the mortality rate is, many bugs die during their pilgrimage, many dying atop the shells of their fellows, thus creating this pile of corpses. So not only are the bugs required to climb over their own people just to reach the Citadel, but because of how many have died, they literally serve as the foundation for all of Pharloom. Removing this mound would cause many structures, including the Citadel, to collapse. It's almost too on the nose to say that the Citadel is built on the backs of others. Despite that, the pilgrims don't seem to mind as they continue to hold tight to their faith. And besides, the people of Bone Bottom are always willing to help despite the circumstances. Some people use it as a way to get prepared for the journey ahead, but others, like Flick, stayed behind, opting to not start their journey just yet, and instead helping others get started on theirs. Depending on their journey, the next stop on their pilgrimage will likely be Pilgrim's Rest within the far fields. It similarly serves as a rest stop for those who have made it this far, although the clerk Mort seems more interested in profiting off these pilgrims as he charges an entrance fee upon each visit. He also says that sharing your devotion with him is sure to bring you good luck on the journey ahead. The pilgrims of this kingdom trade in rosaries. They're used as both a sign of faith and currency, thus why so many graves can be seen with rosaries on them. But this creates kind of a toxic society where faith is measured in monetary value. So many either steal rosaries off these graves or barter for them with the promise of extra devotion and faith. Assuming the pilgrims make it this far, they're likely to meet with Kriege over at the halfway home, or Pavo, steward of Belhart. Both once again served as pit stops, with Belhart being the last stop before the final ascent. That final ascent requires the pilgrim to traverse Shellwood and its creatures, as well as the sandy dunes of the Blasted Steppes. But a sign nearby warns to accept the judgment of those on the rise beyond, as those who stand at Pharloom's holy crest must be proven pure of will and want. Guarding the Blasted Steppes are judges, large, gilded guardians who stand vigilant, ready to pass judgment on any would-be pilgrim. Given the countless husks near their stations, it's clear that most didn't pass. For a long while this was Pharloom, but one must remember that much of the kingdom was built off the power of silk, and the Grandmother was the creator of that silk. Within the White Ward section of the Citadel, we can find chairs and tools all made for the sake of implanting threads into people's bodies. Surgeons and those within the ward found that silk prolonged one's life. This was a scientific miracle. Eternal life for all mortal bugs. The sheer possibilities of such a discovery and what it could mean for the future of Pharloom was captivating. Too captivating. The Citadel then began to run experiment after experiment, using any bugs they could find as test subjects. Hundreds of husks can be found in the basement of this lab, all victims of the experiment, many of them thrown into a pit with the door locked behind them. The souls of these victims, who were so obsessed with silk, even coalesced into the unraveled, their tormented will made manifest. But as they soon discovered, the silk was starting to take a mind of its own. Corpses with silk inside them can be seen being puppeted by the very same silk. Worse, consider how long this could have been going on. As time went on, more and more people were putting silk into their shells, so much so that when they had children, they were already born with silk inside them. This was the beginning of the end for Pharloom. Grandmother Silk was able to take control of the people's minds using this silk. In doing so, much of the kingdom fell under her control once again. Her ultimate goal seems to be eternal devotion. This curse had basically turned the people of Pharloom into zombies, not unlike the infection from the Hollow Nest. Many of the bugs we come across seem to be eternally stuck doing their jobs. The silk from the grandmother also seems to have affected other tribes as well. It's noted that the Scar are infected with the same symptoms of the haunting, and in a flashback to Verdania, we could see silk covering the prince's home, meaning that even though his lover gave his life to protect their land, it still ultimately fell. But this shows that it does not seem to be an isolated incident. Any bug that would call Pharloom their home could be stricken by this silken curse. Though not every single bug has succumbed to its power. Many pilgrims we meet during the game aren't affected by it. That doesn't mean they never will, but no one seems to know how the curse works and if there is a way to slow down or speed up its progress. It should also be noted that the kingdom is underground. The very top of the map is implied to be the surface, so all of this was built underground similar to the Hollow Nest. Bugs on the surface are not shown to be affected by the silken curse, so this power only seems to extend downwards, although how far it stretches outside the kingdom is unclear. But with a bit more power in her hands, she used her devoted Citadel troops to then hunt for her lost children. In the cradle, we could find similar cages to the one Hornet will be brought in soon. Notes on the cages list the description of remaining weavers that they are meant to find and where they are located. It also seems as though that these were not the original weavers either, given the text says quarter or eighth part. As for why? Well, I'm under the assumption that she needs them for their silk, possibly so that she can gather up enough strength to finally wake up. But while the bugs were haunted with her silk, something haunted her. The realization that she no longer has any children. The mother in her name is intentional, for the grandmother seemed to care for those she considered her children. But her actual children had all fled and were not trustworthy, so she decided to make her own instead. Phantom and Lace are two beings entirely made of silk. Phantom seems to be a failed attempt at making a daughter, as she is noted as being too frail. So now she keeps watch over the Citadel's choking refuse as noted in her journal entry. But Lace was designed to be the mother's child. She would then take up position as a sentinel, watching over the kingdom for her mother. A mirror inside Phantom's exhaust organ shows Lace and Phantom. Lace calls Phantom her sister, also questioning why the grandmother spun them to break and to fade, clearly showing that they don't really approve of their current existence. It may have also been around this time that some of the weavers had returned to Pharloom. The Weaver's song charm from Hollow Knight says that those who came to the Hollow Nest when they fled would return. They were fleeing because of the infection that had gripped the Hollow Nest, and probably felt that it was safer in Pharloom than there. However, they were likely captured like the other Weavers, and one of them may have been known as the Widow. The Widow is a Weaver, but one that does not have their mask, and also has pins lodged in their spine. This is supposed to prevent them from using their own silk, so it seems like Grandmother Silk had brought her under her command. She would then serve willingly using the haunted silk that she was allowed to use to ensnare some pilgrims, while waiting patiently for her mother to wake up. Knowing that this was the end, a Weaver writes that they will die waiting and praying for the day that a being of silken strength will come and weave them free. And it's here where our story through Silksong begins. During her culling, the Grandmother had found evidence of another Weaver who escaped her grasp, one hailing from the Hollow Nest. So choir members were sent to the Kingdom of the White Worm to claim the half-worm, half-weaver hybrid. This being serves as our protagonist. Silksong's protagonist, Hornet, was previously featured in the first game, Hollow Knight. She was daughter to both Hera the Beast and the Pale King. Back in the Hollow Nest, the Pale King needed 3 dreamers who would serve as locks, so to speak, as they would trap the Hollow Knight in the Black Egg Temple. One of these dreamers was Hera the Beast. As part of a deal, the Pale King was to have a child with her, and that child was Hornet. In her childhood, she lived amongst her mother's people, those of the Deep Nest, including the Spider Tribe and the other Weavers who fled Pharloom. As she grew, they taught her the power to weave threads, and she would use this to craft her cloak. Hera would watch over Hornet as she grew older, but only for a short time, as she would have to become a dreamer. In her absence, she was looked after by the White Lady, the spouse of the Pale King, and trained by the Hive Queen Vespa. She would then eventually become a sentinel of the Hollow Nest, watching over and protecting the dying kingdom. While initially coming off as antagonistic, she would later become the Knight's ally as they both worked together to stop the infection from destroying all of Hollow Nest. Following her duties in Hollow Nest, it's reported that Hornet was kidnapped and taken here to the kingdom. As she arrives in the Kingdom of Pharloom inside the gilded cage, a white firefly can be seen touching the cage, which removes the seal, giving Hornet a chance to escape. As she falls all the way to the bottom, she dusts herself off and starts her journey into the Kingdom of Pharloom. Hornet knows that if she were to escape and go somewhere else, then she would just as likely be captured again. So rather than run away, she plans to go to the source, find out why she was taken, and deal with anyone who happens to impede this goal. But to do that would mean going to the Citadel, so like the pilgrims, Hornet will have to take her own pilgrimage to the Grand Gate. Just like those same pilgrims, she will arrive at Bone Bottom, Pilgrim's Rest, Halfway Home, and Bellheart. Along the way though, she will get wrapped up in a few encounters and meet some other bugs who are here in Pharloom for various reasons. Not every NPC in the game has dialogue and events worth mentioning though, so I'll only hit the important ones. Sherma is a pilgrim who seeks the Citadel like all the others. Garmin and Zaza are a duo who hail from another land and come seeking an audience with the Citadel, as the haunting of the threat overcomes their village as well. Chakra also came from another village, although she is here seeking her master, who comes to Pharloom for reasons unknown. 2 women, the Seamstress and Pinterest, who are sisters of an order of female warriors, have come here to Pharloom and settled in different locations. They seem to be assassins of some kind, or at least an order that practice combat, although the Seamstress has hung up her weapons of war. Needle in dialogue implies that she does this seamstress work to forget the loss of her sisters, which could explain why she's no longer interested in fighting. To the west is also the Wormways, which, while rather insignificant, there is an alchemist by the name of Xylitol. He seems to be experimenting with lifeblood, although he calls it plasmium. It carries with it the same regenerative effects that it did in Hollow Knight, but Xylitol's purpose for studying it seems to be in an effort to save his dying land, as evidenced by the needle in dialogue. Inside Sinner's Road and Putrefied Ducks are also 2 beings of the same species, Styx and the Huntress. Styx immediately sees himself as Hornet's servant and will honor this by crafting her silk eaters, and the Huntress wants Hornet to catch her some meat, as she fears her children, who will eat anything, will turn their hunger towards her. Other than that, there is very little that connects these 2 outside of their species. There is also a Bell Beast in the Bellways who can help Hornet travel throughout Pharloom. It seems to be an ancient method of travel, as pilgrims nowadays consider such conveniences a sin. There is also a significant number of Weaver shrines in these lands. While this on the surface isn't that polarizing, each one directly references Hornet, as it says a daughter of a distant land, we who have remained have waited long, bind our strength to yours, reclaim the future of our haunted kingdom. This suggests that either some semblance of these Weavers still remains in these shrines, or that her arrival in Pharloom is something they may have foreseen, and thus left her with some powers to help her on her quest. Although it's more than likely just a general statement, since all the Weavers are assumed to be women, given they all refer to themselves as sisters, and seeing as all the Weavers left Pharloom, all of them would be coming from a distant land. Regarding some major roadblocks on our way to the Citadel, Hornet will have to come to blows with Lace and Widow. Lace is simply just a sparring match of sorts as she runs away shortly after. But the Widow seems to have used the silk bestowed to her by the Grand Mother to ensnare the townspeople. She also knew of Hornet's arrival to the kingdom and knows of her lineages as the daughter to both the Worm and the Weaver. Eventually she will reach the Grand Gate, which may or may not be locked depending on how many bells have been rung within Pharloom. Once all have been rung, the only thing left in her way is the last judge. This boss's lore is similar to that of the smaller judges strewn about the blasted steppes. They seem to have been around for a few generations though, never having lost a battle, continually judging those who enter the Citadel. Once the lost judge is defeated, the Citadel will open, and Act 2 will have begun. Although Hornet may also find herself stuck in a shrouded field of mist. Braving through that mist, she faces off against Phantom, who you'll recall is being made entirely of silk. She's been here so long that her shell has grayed from age. Age has also taught her though that she'd prefer a glorious death in combat rather than wither away in decline. If Hornet bests her in combat, she'll gain access to an elevator that will take her to the Grand Bellway, giving her an alternate route into the Citadel. Regardless of the method, the Citadel is now open. As she continues to climb upwards, Hornet may discover the first shrine. The ringing of the bell, much like the other bells outside the Citadel, signals to the pilgrims that this is a haven for them, although the caretaker is less than pleased with this news, having enjoyed his time off. To get to the top of the cradle where Grandmother Silk lies, Hornet will have to defeat the Cogwork Dancers, the same ones modeled after the Green Prince's lover. Towards the end of the boss fight though, only one of the Cogwork soldiers will be killed, leaving just one behind. Proving not just how effective they were as a duo, but a sad representation of the Green Prince, and how he must feel without his partner by his side. Afterward, a voice on the loudspeaker tells her that she must perform the threefold melody. Within the Citadel are 3 parts of a melody. Each one represents the 3 groups that make the Citadel what it is: the Conductors, the Architects, and the Keepers. The Conductors are the ones who perform the songs with the choir. The Architects build devices or whatever is needed from the Citadel, while the Keepers maintain records of Pharloom and preserve them for the generations to come. When journeying to the Cauldron, Hornet will meet with the 12th Architect. All architects seem to be put into this job by force, as while they initially say nature, they follow it by saying directive, then cage. Almost as if they are lying to themselves before admitting their reality. But no matter their condition, they are eager to help Hornet, as the directive states they must help Pharloom's first children, aka those of Weaver blood. However, they don't know the melody she seeks. That would be atop the Cogwork core, just below the cradle. The core is notable because it's likely built by the architects. Atop the core is a puzzle, which, when complete, will give Hornet the first melody. To find the melody of the Conductors, Hornet will have to talk to Conductor Ballador. He's too sickly to leave his bedchambers and has little to offer other than his melody, further apologizing for the hospitality, acknowledging that the Citadel has fallen quite far in recent years. It also seems as though the silk being woven into this carriage is keeping him alive. The third and the final melody belongs to the Vault Keepers. Only the Pontiff of the Vault knows the melody, but when she arrives, the Pontiff is dead, so she'll have to use the Vault Keeper's gramophone to listen to the melody herself. Once all 3 have been found, the melody can be played. Waiting for her at the cradle is Lace. It's after this fight that Hornet realizes the extent of Lace's existence, that she is a being made of silk and not a real bug like the others. Hornet says the word life in her dialogue, which Lace finds repulsive, preferring to acknowledge that she is nothing more than a husk shaped like a child. However, Hornet reaffirms her stance, saying that while she is unique, that does not mean that life is absent from it. Lace isn't having any of these platitudes though. She still sees her existence as cruel, and that in the end, the Grandmother only really cared about Hornet anyway. At the top of the cradle is Grandmother Silk, the heart of the haunting, monarch of Pharloom, and the source of the kingdom's silk. If Hornet happens to defeat her, she can be seen binding the powers of the Grandmother to herself, the same way she's been binding the other beings' powers to upgrade and manifest her crests. The power she takes from her is immense, and not only gives her a new kind of mask, but her silk bar exceeds far past its normal limits. She has enough power within her to rival even the Grandmother herself, and that is precisely the point. For see, after Hornet binds her power, she becomes the Weaver Queen, effectively swapping places with the Grandmother. New threads form outside the cradle, enveloping the entire kingdom, with Hornet in the middle, who's now grown a pair of spider legs. This is very similar to the first ending of Hollow Knight, where our protagonists swap places with the current ruler or leader. But of course, this is just one of many endings within Silksong. One seems to not be in the game though, or at the very least, no one knows how to get it just yet. You've likely seen in the various all endings videos here on YouTube an ending where the Grandmother seems to consume Hornet's power. It then ends with her exerting direct control over the pilgrims via silk. At the time of this video's release, no one knows how to get it, so either the ending was cut and it was just data mined from the files, or people have achieved it but aren't sure what the steps are. It's the only ending without an achievement attached to it though, so I suspect it's the former. Either way, the next ending we do know of is the cursed ending. During your journey you may come across an NPC named Greyroot. They're a rather unique creature, unlike any of the other bugs in Shellwood or even Pharloom. She asks Hornet to help her perform some kind of ritual. It doesn't go anywhere though until you deliver her the Twisted Bud. This crying child is what's needed for the completion of this ritual. If you give this to Greyroot and accept your part in the ritual, Greyroot will transform and constrict Hornet. As she wakes up, she finds herself not only beneath the home of Greyroot, but also with a parasite that's managed to hook onto the inside of her shell. What you are supposed to do is talk to Yarnaby to have it removed, but if you forego that directive and instead head back to the cradle and challenge her once more, you'll get a different ending. This time, rather than Hornet binding the mother, the roots of the parasite could be seen enveloping the grandmother instead. As the scene transitions, we could see Hornet now encased in wood, just like she was before, but now one with the wood itself, while a noise of something escaping is heard. The ritual was complete, and the parasite is now ready for its official birth. What that means for Hornet, or the future of Pharloom, we aren't sure, but it certainly can't be good. To get the true ending, however, you will have to do a bit of work. After enough exploration, Hornet will eventually receive the wish titled Silk and Soul. The caretaker asks for her assistance in a manner regarding the grandmother. The caretaker asks if Hornet is ready to face her and take her place. Hornet responds that she is, that dominance seems to be baked deep in her blood, and that replacing her is something she desires. But part of her resists this outcome, instead desiring a solution where Pharloom is freed and the kingdom's bugs unshackle from their current fate, and it's this side that she is currently feeling more pull towards. The caretaker agrees and gives her a way to do so. She will have to acquire a few items though, that being the Snare Setter and 3 souls. The Hermit Soul from the Bell Hermit in Bellheart, the Seeker Soul taken by Grohl the Great in Biowater, and the Maiden Soul from the Chapel Maid back in Bone Bottom. These people were members of his family, who had lived here even before Grandmother Silk. Using this and the Snare Setter, we could defeat her and let the trap do the rest. If you're willing to go through with it, all you need to do is play the needle in after she's been defeated. The snare then clamps down on the monarch, only for the snare to reveal itself to be none other than a portal to the abyss. Tendrils from the abyss come out to pull her down into its clutches, not unlike our time with the Radiants. The monarch refuses to go down without a fight though, and grabs Hornet, hoping to drag them both down into the cold dark depths of the abyss. That is until Lace arrives and cuts off her mother's arm, sending Hornet down below while she and the monarch are consumed by the void. As Hornet falls, she finds her footing and watches as the trap explodes, sending her even farther down the cradle. And as the game comes to a close, we can see the grandmother's silk threads appear from beneath the ground, now covered in the black stains of the void, showing us that the void now has her powers under their command, teasing a conflict soon to come. And by soon, I mean right now. As while the game ends, with the credits and everything, if you navigate to your save, you will see that it is now consumed by those very same tendrils, looking to not just take Pharloom, but even your save file into its pits. After you've swatted them away, you will see that your save does not teleport you back to before the fight where you last rested, but continues towards the game's third and final act. Act 3 is a completely new section of Silksong, entirely hidden behind the game's true ending. It starts with Hornet awaking in a white field of flowers after her fall. She makes her way down trying to assess the situation, only to run into members of the Citadel, but ones who've been infected by Void from the Abyss. As she fights her way past, she meets with the other pilgrims back at Songclave. From here she talks with Sherma, who takes on the role of caretaker, now that the real caretaker had left to join his other family members near the ruined chapel. Looking for answers as to what happened, Hornet will set out in search of them. Before that happens though, I would like to take stock of the situation. Much of Pharloom was changed in the transition between Act 2 and 3, so I'd like to go over those changes. It will be a stupidly long list, so I apologize ahead of time, but I do want to be as thorough as possible. As a sort of general change, most if not every environment in the game has been damaged in the destruction. Sometimes it's cosmetic, other times older areas are walled off and have to be reopened. Enemies will also now periodically become one with the Void. This also seems to extend to boss fights as well, as while the Forge Brothers themselves were unaffected, the minions they send out to attack you become infected soon after. As for the NPCs and locations, Songclave is still holding strong, but the pilgrims are scared for their lives. Kriege from the halfway home is safe, as well as the bar. Bellheart is under threat from many Void-infected enemies. But, having completed her task of finding her master's resting place in the previous act, Chakra has decided to stay and become the town's only protector. Would it not be for her, Bellheart would have already fallen. Pilgrim's Rest is destroyed, with Mort seemingly dead as well, although there is no body to confirm that, and Bone Bottom is utterly destroyed, which forces the residents to move to where you first met the Flea Master in the Marrow. As for the others, Lottie, Kroll, and Benjen have likely died due to a cave-in. Loam had died from the collapse, still having never seen the Citadel, but Needle in dialogue from him shows that in his final moment, he realized he was finally free, and that he no longer needed to run anymore. Vaultkeeper Cordinius survives, as well as the Twelfth Architect, assuming you didn't deplete their stock, of course, although it seems that Conductor Balador has died. Upon using the Bellway, instead of being greeted by the Bell Beast, you'll be greeted by the Bell Eater. Jumping inside the hole it left behind, you must fight the beast before the Bell Beast returns, not only helping Hornet take it down, but also revealing itself to be a mother, who has a flock of beastlings. Garmund and Zaza are out hunting the forces of evil in hopes of protecting those still left. But sometime later, Zaza will come running to Hornet asking for her aid, for Garmund has succumbed to the void. Zaza urges her to help him, but by then it's too late, and she will have to put him down. The Huntress will have disappeared if her quest was complete, or will be replaced with Runt, one of her kids who has eaten her if you didn't complete her quest. While Styx will have initially disappeared, but will come back if you destroyed the Void Masses caught in his net. Pinmaster Pliny came by to pay some respects to some fallen near the Greatwood, specifically the grave of someone he loved. He was attacked by some void bugs and would not have minded if he died next to her in this moment, but was glad that Hornet came to save him. While not a result of Act 3's transition, you'll now be able to unlock all the lockets necessary to complete Ava's quest, which results in Hornet binding Ava to her, the same way that she's been binding other beings' powers. Ava would rather live on subsumed inside Hornet than live in a shell under the ground, and Hornet can grant that wish for her. The Pinterest moved from her residence in the Blasted Steppes to Mount Fae. She left behind a note asking for people to challenge her should they want a duel. Recognizing the state of the world, she wants to die a glorious death in combat. But Hornet refused. She actually came here to test her strength, to make sure she's ready for the Abyss. But she's very determined in stopping this threat, so knowing this, she says that the world is going to need some strong bugs to keep a watch over things. And Hornet hopes that the Pinterest will be one of those bugs when the time comes. Trobio, if defeated in Act 2, now returns as Tormented Trobio. Compared to the previous act where he was willing to reignite the flames of Pharloom with an evening of deadly dancing, now he's become so depressed over the state of the world that he'd rather see it consumed, choosing to now embrace the doom of the coming void. The Crows from Greymore will send summons to Hornet asking to meet her. They seem to have recognized her part to play in the current doom, and so have donned themselves in black colors and attempted to kill her. A new path near their home is also open, which reveals a small cave where the Green Prince and the cogwork recreation of his lover can be found. You can use a new melody learned during this act to travel back in time to Verdania's Peak and challenge him and his other half in combat. If you succeed, you take his heart, and the Green Prince can be seen laying next to the automaton, joining his prince in the afterlife. Going back westward and traveling to the worm waves will see the plasmium fully engulf the region. Both the foundation of the tunnels and the worms themselves have been infected by plasmium. Xylitol too has also been consumed by the plant, and in time will become a host for the plant, although he does not seem to mind. His assistant, Alchemist Zongo, has also been revived from the dead thanks to plasmium, and will have to be fought if encountered. And finally, other characters not mentioned like Gilly in Hunter's March, Forge Daughter, Balo, Relic Seeker, Pavo, the Seamstress, Loyal Mergwyn, and many others are all still alive, but most of their dialogue revolves around acknowledging the destruction, but continuing to do what they were doing before, so no noteworthy changes there. Returning back to the main story, Hornet was looking for the caretaker at the ruined chapel. Upon arriving, she's greeted by the family, who reveal themselves to be Snail Shamans. Snail Shamans were a tribe of people we met back in Hollow Knight. Very little was known about them, other than their ability to draw soul from creatures and use that soul in their spells. This would explain why Grohl was able to use soul spells during his boss fight, as he took the powers of the Seeker's soul for himself. Hornet calls them cowards for hiding while the kingdom falls to ruin. They claim that their snare simply did what it was supposed to do, so what's the harm? Although Hornet rightfully calls them out for forgetting to mention that they were taking her to the Abyss. They don't apologize for this, although they do admit that they did not expect this to be the outcome. They assumed Grandmother Silk would simply die from being consumed by the void, but the tendrils throughout the kingdom prove her resistance to such a fate. The reason why has to do with Lace. Grandmother Silk loves Lace, so because she was trapped inside the void with her, she is fighting to protect her. She's crafted another silk ball like the one in her chambers to shield them both from harm. Had Lace not fallen in with her, I suspect that the grandmother would have just resigned herself to her fate. But because she is still alive fighting its influence, the void was able to take hold of her silk, which is why they're seen everywhere in Act 3. For the most part, her plan to hold on as long as she can has worked out, but seeing as they are incredibly deep within the water with no way out, It's only a matter of time before the Void takes them. But that's where Hornet will come in. She plans to take down Grandmother Silk so that the Void can no longer hold on to her threads, while also saving Lace from the Abyss. This would rewrite the damage she's done and bring back some stability to Pharloom. But to do that, she will have to actually travel to the Abyss, and that is easier said than done. The only way to the Abyss that exists is in the deep docks. She will have to talk to Ballo and the Forge Daughter and ask to be given access to the vessel. Once convinced, Hornet takes the diving bell down to the Abyss. Last time we saw the Abyss was back in Hollow Knight, where we learned of the true origins of the Knight and the other vessels. We also saw evidence that an ancient civilization that used to worship the Void existed a long time ago, evidence that could be found within this game's Abyss as well. Regardless, Hornet's time in the Abyss does end with her finding the resting place of Grandmother Silk, which is, unfortunately, very deep below the surface of the water. Greeting her at the top is Lace, or what seems to be some kind of projection of her. She casually chats with Hornet, mentioning how she's happy to make the grandmother suffer, gleefully recounting the fact that she, the child considered broken, was what caused her mortal wound in the end, further rejoicing at the thought of the kingdom coming down. Hornet refuses to accept that outcome, and vows to save this kingdom in whatever way she can. But diving into the Void without a plan would be certain death, but Hornet does know of a way. She remembers an old flower from her childhood, one that could repel the Void. This flower is called Everbloom, although Hollow Knight fans would remember it as the Delicate Flower. A flower like this does not grow within Pharloom. However, she is convinced that with the snail's magical powers, if she finds the Everbloom within an old memory of hers, she may be able to manifest its existence and bring it to the real world. To do that, a ritual will need to be performed, and it's going to require the hearts of specific warriors that existed far before the monarch came to Pharloom. Hornet will have to use a new power first to go back in time and fight these beings in their prime and take their heart. These warriors are the ones we've already discussed: Cross King Khan, Carmelita, Nihilith, and the Green Prince, although only 3 of these are necessary. From here she lies atop the dais and is sent into her own memories. Through this she can relive some moments from her childhood, and through her conversation with the White Lady, can manifest the Everbloom into existence. With the object of her desire in her hands, she can now descend into the Void and save this kingdom. She dives into the water using the Everbloom as a shield to protect herself from the Void, until she makes it inside the large silk ball. Inside is not only Grandmother Silk, very much still wounded from the previous battle, but also the final boss of Silksong, Lost Lace, the same Silkspawn child as before, but now possessed by the Void. As Hornet strikes the final blow, she defeats Lace once more, and manages to remove the Void that once possessed her. But the Void has been slowly pouring into the arena, so with her last bit of strength, Grandmother Silk gives Hornet the last remaining threads of her silk, which gives her just enough power to shoot back out of the Void with Lace in hand. However, it's still not enough. Hornet and Lace now lay helplessly inside the Void, but before it consumes them, an old friend comes by to pay her a visit. The Knight has returned. During the events of Hollow Knight, we learn that the Knight was one of the many vessels created by the Pale King to subdue the Radiance. The Hollow Knight was ultimately the chosen vessel, while the rest were simply discarded, left to wander the Abyss. Throughout the game, though, the Knight would learn of their origin, reunite the Abyss and the vessels, and during the true ending, would reveal their current form, Void-given form. However, we briefly saw another form in this cutscene, known as Void-given Focus, or the Shade Lord. This was only accessible during the Godmaster DLCs. But it only appears for a brief moment, and is never seen again. So that means that either the true ending or the Godmaster DLC endings are canon. I'd personally like to see more appearances from the Knight in DLC before I can make an accurate assessment. Regardless of whatever it happens to be, the Knight shows up, takes Hornet and Lace out of the Void, and places them back on safe ground while the Knight disappears. Thanks to their effort, Lace and Hornet were saved, and thanks to Hornet, Grandmother Silk no longer has to fight to save Lace, and can now be safely consumed by the Void, thus relinquishing the Void's control over her threads, saving the kingdom from experiencing total collapse. While this is considered the final ending, like in Hollow Knight, if you also happen to find Mr. Mushroom in all of his predetermined locations, then the game ends with him shooting out of Pharloom onto the surface, heading to places unknown. Where will the story go from here? Will Lace become a playable character or join Hornet on her next adventure? Silksong will be getting lots of post-launch content sometime in the future, so only time will tell. But this officially brings us to the end of Hollow Knight Silksong. Before we go though, I quickly wanted to run through some miscellaneous lore that I couldn't fit eloquently inside the script, but did want to mention regardless. First, in Mount Fae, Hornet can meet with the Mask Maker. The Hollow Nest had its own Mask Maker too, but this one is not the same Mask Maker. Just like the first game, you can also knock his mask off, which reveals a lot more dialogue. Hornet claims that she did this to make him lucid, implying that the mask actually manipulates him. The mask seems to keep him focused on his task of making other masks, but without it he could speak freely. Masks were assumed to be what gives bugs sapience, that allowed them to speak and think with purpose. At least that's what could have been surmised from our talk with the mask maker in Hollow Nest. But with that in mind, this seems to be the opposite, so this is something to definitely keep an eye on. Other than this, he doesn't have much of the conversation, but he does comment on the state of things outside. He also talks about the bird above Mount Fae. This massive bird gives Hornet the double jump ability, and then leaves. He mentions that her legged ancestors, the Weavers, built their chambers and a calling device at the top specifically for this. I have no idea if this bird will make another appearance or is simply here for this interaction, but it is worth noting. And finally, I want to talk about Steel Soul mode. Just like in Hollow Knight, after achieving an ending, you gain access to the game's permadeath mode. That mode also added new NPCs such as Steel Soul Jin, and the same is true for Silksong. Styx has been replaced with a new NPC. His whole shtick was that he made Silk Eaters, and on account of this game's permadeath, those are useless. So now you can sell those Silk Eaters to this new NPC for some rosaries. In the Blasted Steppes, you can then find Steel Seer Z. Hornet recognizes her kind, likely due to her past interactions with Jin, noting that Z's masters have likely taken an interest in this place as well. Z is a mission for Hornet that she can undertake. Z lost her vassal somewhere in Pharloom and needs to find them before Z's masters send their wrath upon her. You are then to find 3 rest places throughout Pharloom, which seem to be different for each player. After finding all 3, Hornet tracks them to a secret cave in Bone Bottom. Here we find her vassal Sula trying to summon the Void. Sula explains that they couldn't take the constant pain that they were seeing. The land dying, the pilgrims falling, it was too much for them to bear. Sula also drops the term Steelhearts, which finally gives us a name for Z, Jin, and their people. These Steelhearts seem to care not for the prosperity of the land, nor its people. They only seek to observe the goings-on of the world, and that's all. This is likely for some higher purpose we can't possibly imagine just yet. Sula can't take it anymore, and summon the strength of the Void to try and save the people. But Hornet stopped them, knowing full well the price paid for toying with the Void. Recognizing the nuance of the situation though, Hornet decides to let Sula go. Informing Z of the mission, she says that this escape matters little, for Sula will be hunted till the end of time. Hornet says that this may be preferable, as being free is better than servitude. Although this kind of complexity is too much for Z, who requires some time to think about the matter. But ultimately she does come around to sharing the same hope that her vassal will live free, and hope that her master will still see her loyalty. She then gives Hornet a reward, which she claims is from where she was born, and then says that for now, she will continue to watch and observe. With this questline and the mention of Steelheart in the City of Steel, hopefully we can expect more from the Steel people in the future, especially since a character seems to be missing from the roster. Steel Assassin Sharp was teased before Hollow Knight even came out, but does not make an appearance in-game, so it seems as though Team Cherry will be adding more Steel Soul content in the future. Only time will tell, I suppose. But that wraps up the other odds and ends that I wanted to mention. And so thank you all for watching today, and I hope you enjoyed. I plan to make more videos like this in the future for when the DLCs come out, and then I'll come around at the end and cover everything, base game and DLC included, in one giant video, to put a neat little bow on everything. In the meantime, I have lots of other games I plan to get to first, so if you like this video, feel free to check out the rest of the videos on the channel. As always, like the video if you enjoy and subscribe if you're new. Thank you to my returning viewers for coming back to another video, and to the patrons who continue to support the work I do. Take care everyone. Goodbye.